Oh, shit. I just had 2 cups of coffee and I'm yawning. It's bullshit. Hello, everyone. I'm Neil, aka Ishmelon, and welcome back to my Color Pie discussion series that I lovingly call Run It. Let's talk over pie. And if you hadn't seen the first video, I'll put a link to that in the description. This is going to be part 2, which incidentally is the first focused color deep dive into the full color pie. We're starting with white, so that is today. We're starting with white, and we are going around the rest of the monocolors until we finish through with blue, black, red, and green, and then we'll move on to the dual colors. If you hadn't seen my previous video, it is mostly just a summary of all of the other color, or all of the colors in general, just sort of footnotes, even get you an idea of the flavor in-game of the color and what they sort of mean philosophically, what their goals are, and what their means are to achieve those goals. And in this video, my plan is to focus on white and delve more into what their goals mean, what their means are used for, and how that can be extrapolated into our world, into things that we can associate with a lot easier than, you know, magical things that I guess arguably don't exist in our world. As part of this, I also want to delve into how white views the other colors, its relationships with the other colors, and try to keep within the perspective of white. Because it'd be easy when talking about white's relationships with other colors to start delving into the 2 color pairs, and so I'm going to try my best to avoid that. Near the end, I'm also going to have some fictional characters from pop culture that are fairly based in white. So let's get into it. I should also say that my last video was made in a very hard script format that I more or less went pretty much by. This one I'm doing a bit more free form. I've got an outline with bullet points of stuff. Some are written out near explicitly. Some are kind of just bullet points for myself to extrapolate upon. Oh my god, I say that word way too much for me to expand upon with my own brain power. To start this off, I'm going to reiterate the key phrase of white, which was peace through order, meaning their goal is peace, and the way they want to get there is through utilizing order. Now, the first thing to do when addressing that phrase is to figure out what white's definition of peace is. And in fact, that is actually pretty hard to define, because peace is very subjective for white, depending on the individual, depending on the organization. Peace is more of a general term for, not harmony, because that's very green. It's kind of a general term for things working together correctly along white's moral outlook, moral position. So many different white-aligned entities will have their own definition of peace, is what I'm getting at. But within that, white does believe that its own goals and ideals are infallible. It believes that what its goal is absolute, and that is the way. It is very stubborn in that, and I'll get to that in a bit more later. But white strives to achieve what it considers that peace to be, and although their definition might not match up with another white-aligned entity, which by extension is how you'll often get multiple conflicting white-aligned groups, whether it be in fiction or even in real life. You can find that if you're looking for it. Next question for me when addressing this key phrase is, how far is white really willing to go to achieve that peace? And well, a lot of times you can find that white might believe that the ends justify the means, although that is not necessarily applicable to all white-aligned folks. Most of the time, most commonly, white is going to be much more focused on the safety and well-being of the general populace, the safety and well-being of people. The further and further you get devoted to white's order and absolution, that's when you're going to get closer to the ends justify the means, yada yada yada. And again, I'll come up with some more examples for that later. Now, as far as relating this back to an individual standpoint, some examples of white's peace might be, one person's peace could be quiet solitude, and just everything is just silent and peaceful in the literal state, or literal meaning. While another's might be hosting a get-together with a bunch of friends where everyone is engaged and entertained and it's lively and it's good. So white doesn't have to be all about socialization. White doesn't have to be all about quiet and order. Absolutely. But it's when you get to extremes that it starts to be like that, and then that's how often you'll see it in the game on certain cards. It'll be white as defined by these strict laws and boundaries and stuff like that. And now for the second part of that key phrase to sort of look at and analyze is the methods of order that white might use. And they have many different means of order that white will decide to use depending on what the situation might call for. Maybe it might be as simple as keeping to a schedule, like organizing a day-to-day itinerary and abiding by that, and that's how things go well. It could be just separating tasks based on urgency and severity. A lot of times, folks who live in that sort of white-aligned space, as far as their decision-making goes, a lot of times they'll find that when they have a big to-do list, a lot of that comes together at once, and if they don't organize it, they can't even comprehend it. They can't even begin to tackle anything until they have it in a to-do list. And that's not a bad thing at all. In fact, that's part of their strength, is that organization and that, I'm not sure exactly what the word is, forthcoming stick-to-itiveness? No, that doesn't work. But that's part of their strength, is being able to prioritize and delegate. White is very good at both of those things, and so it'll use those to fulfill tasks or chores or day-to-day necessities at whatever may need be. Another method that white utilizes and calls upon is their utilization of fairness and justice, and how they focus on blind judgment. A lot of what white does is they try to distance themselves from not only sentimentality, but also personal bias. They try and separate themselves as an individual from a situation and judge it objectively. Now again, that's not all white-aligned folks. It's just a common use of white's methods towards getting to its goals. Let's move on now to the different aspects of white. Different ways that you'll find white being utilized especially well or being especially successful at. And the first thing that comes to me when thinking about white is white's focus on organization, on hierarchies, on systems. White believes that when there's a plan and when people abide by that plan, that things are going to go very smoothly. They're going to go as designed, and that people will be safe and well taken care of. For example, the first thing that comes to me in our world is street laws, driving laws, all those things on the road when we're driving our big metal death machines to get dozens of miles to another place within a day. It can be very dangerous if you're just driving along. I mean, think about it. Our roads are just paved flat land with lines drawn on them. There's nothing physical keeping you within your lane. It's just the knowledge of, if I stay within these lines to get where I'm going to be safe. Assuming everybody else abides by that as well. Now, humans are fallible, humans are different. Humans rebel often enough, and so you'll find occasionally people, swerve in between lanes trying to get around for fun or to try and get somewhere. White is the one that sets up the laws to try and punish those people because the majority of people are abiding by the street laws to keep themselves and everyone else safe. So, another example of white's objectivity being subjective is street signs and lines on the road and street lanes. Those are all subjective. The objectivity of that is that it's just paint. But white believes the objectivity is that those are where you stay. In between those lines, you stay there, you are safe, everything goes according to plan. And so that's kind of the perspective there. I'm very biased. I'm kind of biased to be overcritical of white because I'm fair. I consider myself black aligned and white aligned, but I'm overly critical of white because of that. I'm starting to delve into some personal stuff here. I need to quit that. Another aspect that white is very good at is an emphasis on the many before the few in general practice. White would rather benefit the masses equally and minutely rather than benefit a few individuals greatly. White believes in fairness and equality. Now, I should mention that even within white, equity and equality are fairly debated upon, because equality means that everyone, no matter your station, is receiving the same benefit from whatever the situation may be. Meanwhile, equity means that the people at the top get less, people at the bottom get more, to try and reduce the divide there. Now, depending on your placement within white or whatever other colors may be influencing your decision, that is kind of the debate between equity and equality within white. And so that's kind of up to individuals to figure out and hash out situation to situation, but that is something to keep a note of, is that both ideas are white aligned, but it's in color squabbling. And the final major aspect of white is religion, and sort of parallel to that, just general faith-based decision making, and I'll get to that in a second. White often holds belief and trust in a higher power, in a plan in place, which is similar to their focus on organization and hierarchy. But whereas that belief in the hierarchy is tangible, it's something that they can physically interact with. Their faith, their belief in whatever higher power may be of their choice, that is all based in something they can't touch. They just believe in the system, they believe in the order, and that in itself gives them strength. And now it doesn't have to be a deity, it can be a system of ideals, it can be a code to live by, which is how you might get, in fiction at least, certain white-aligned anti-heroes even. I would say, for example, I don't know, Batman is very white-aligned because, at least in part, because of his firm code to not kill. Now, he may not serve any deities, he may not serve anyone above him, but he does hold to that code and believe that that will keep him from falling astray. And now the reason I mention specifically faith-based decision-making is because white holds a firm code of morals and morality. And by that I mean it believes that there is good objectively, and it believes that there is bad objectively. And so yes, white believes that its code is the true code above all others, and generally that's more in extreme cases. Most commonly in our world with folks that would be considered white aligned, you'll generally see people who are able to live alongside people who have slightly different beliefs, slightly different modes of operation. It's just that in extreme cases of purely white aligned ideologies, you'll see some that believe their personal morals are superior to another's personal morals, what have you. Now let's move on to white's relationship and perspectives on and views on the other colors. I'm going to start with allied colors and their things they agree on and then things they differ on, and then we'll move on to the enemy colors and the things they differ on and the things they agree on. This is going to be fun. This is one of my favorite things about the color pie, is their interactions with each other. So, starting with blue. With blue and white, the things that they agree on are things like logic and efficiency, making sure things run smoothly by design. White and blue both believe in the value of law and truth, of fact and honesty, and again, objectivity. White and blue believe in developing quality of life improvements, for example, infrastructure, making sure that utilities within civilization are advanced, progressed, and maintained to the benefit of the people. Now, the things that white and blue differ on. I will preface this by saying a lot of the things that a color will disagree upon with its ally are things that it will see that ally sharing with the first color's enemy adjacent to that ally. So for example, a lot of things that white will differ on from blue are things that it sees in black. It's a bit complicated, but let me go on. One of the first big differences between white and blue is that white believes in virtue and moral value in progress. Meanwhile, blue believes more in materialism, in tangible progression, technological advancement, if you will. The thing comes to mind to express this more coherently is Jeff Goldblum's line in Jurassic Park. Your scientists were too concerned with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should. That is white criticism on blue. Big brain. So yes, white is a little overcritical of blue's reliance on technology and progress. Another thing they differ on is white wants blue to use its talents for the betterment of many, meanwhile blue's generally using it for the betterment of few. But to that end, blue generally betters itself, so then it can then better others, like putting the oxygen mask on your face in the airplane before putting it on the child's face. You know what I mean? Now, let's go more full into White's perspective looking on Blue. When White looks at Blue, they think that Blue is an invaluable and resourceful ally at best, but also a cold and heartless pragmatist at worst. White wants Blue to work with others more, to actively share its knowledge, and to spend less time improving just itself. White thinks that Blue should spend less time learning and more time actually applying that knowledge. However, White, being very rigid in its perspective, doesn't really consider that some of Blue's efforts toward progress to be as valuable, because oftentimes they go to a point where they aren't directly helping White's beliefs. So there's that subjectivity around the objectivity again. And next up is White's relationship with Green. I don't know if I'm going to keep this in, but I'm going to preface this by saying also, green is one of the hardest colors for me to really wrap my head around and identify with, because it is personally the color I least identify with. So it's hard for me generally to try and get to a point where I can evaluate green in these sort of philosophical aspects, but I'm going to do my best. Things that White and Green agree upon are stuff like the value of and strength in community bonds, in groups of people coming together and working together to serve a community, almost like a living organism. White and Green both believe on the importance of and preserving and benefiting life. Green for the sake of the thriving and growth of life and natural progression. White because it believes that that is what's right, is preserving life and keeping it safe and secure. And also, Green and White both generally believe in service to, or at least respect for, something greater. Oftentimes this comes in the form of religion, or in respect for elders and ancestors. You'll find a lot of religious communities being very White and Green in how they hold themselves together. White and Green both hold a lot of respect for and acknowledgement of tradition, where for Green, tradition is like, these are the things that we've always done, and we see no use in changing them. Whereas White will look at tradition and see that these are the methods and systems that we've used in the past, and they have yet to lead us astray, so let's just keep doing them because they work, and we know they work. Now, one of the things that White and Green differ on are the importance of structured and balanced society. White wants to get more and more civilized to serve the people better, whereas Green doesn't see the problem with where they're at. It doesn't see the use in advancing further as much because everything's working fine. Another thing they differ on is how White will manipulate the land to benefit humanity, for in examples of farming or clearing land for residential construction. Meanwhile, that's not necessarily something Green will do. Green is very happy being general hunter-gatherers. They don't feel they need to change what they already have. Green wants to just live with what they have and be able to build from there. Meanwhile, White is much more industrious than Green. White also has a much larger focus and reliance on man-made systems and processes over instinct, which is a very Green aspect. White doesn't necessarily trust instinct because it believes that to be fallible. Oftentimes with White-aligned ideologies, you will find that they seek to temper the self, to sort of tame that more base side of humanity, and Green doesn't fight that. Green believes that's part of who they are, and that it's only natural that we fight against those systems that we establish as social constructs, which is those exact systems and social constructs are generally created by White to keep everything in line. Now, moving on to how White views Green, White believes that Green's heart is in the right place, but it just doesn't get the whole picture. White wants Green to refocus on the issues at hand as opposed to just rolling with the punches like they normally do. White sees Green's complacency as distraction and laziness in the face of actual problems that have practical and achievable solutions. White wants to solve things. Now that we've addressed White's relationship with its allies, let's look at White's relationship with its enemies, starting with Red. I will say White and Red is one of my favorite two-color interactions. Their biggest difference is White's order versus Red's chaos. White, as I've been expressing consistently, incessantly, White believes in order and structure and a logical progression. Red believes F that. Red just wants to do as it will do, as it wants to do, when it wants to do, and that is directly opposite to everything white believes in. Almost everything. Another thing is something probably a bit more specific and helpful. White is discipline, whereas red is impulse. White believes in and promotes the idea of, as I mentioned, with green, tempering itself and taming itself and being in control of one's own faculties. Meanwhile, red lives off of impulse, lives almost like green's instinct, which is why green and red are allies. We'll get to that another time. Another big difference that I'm very proud of, because I came up with this on my own and I didn't find this anywhere else. This is something I came up with. White's compassion by principle versus red's compassion by sentiment. To go in that a little further, red doesn't really care as much about people that they don't know, but only because they don't know them yet. White mostly cares about everyone because they believe that is what's right, as opposed to because they emotionally care. They care because they believe it's right for them to care, that it is good for them to care. As a final point, red doesn't have the patience and attention span for white's organization and systems, which is another source of headbutting there, which kind of leads again into order and chaos, discipline and impulse, all that. Now, where white and red both agree are how both colors put value in people and in life, or I guess specifically for red, living. As I mentioned earlier in differ, this kind of also lends into how they agree. Both colors are fairly compassionate in slightly different ways, but both colors deeply care for others, and they have value in the lives of others. Both colors, in a similar vein, often tend towards heroism and action. You'll find that a lot of heroes in fiction or protagonists in, honestly, particularly anime, are going to be very white and red aligned, mostly for their ideals. Now, as far as their shared utilization of action, it's because white wants to get things done and red really likes doing things. So they can work together pretty well when they're on the same page. Moving on to how white views red. White looks at red and sees someone who just can't get it together. White doesn't understand that red is perfectly happy living from moment to moment without a plan, because white can't imagine that as a possibility. White cannot imagine the unpredictability of living choice by choice being optimal to knowing your choices ahead of time. Red's innate chaos and energy and emotional vulnerability are seen by white as being extra weights that just hold red back. They're more problems that need to be solved from white's perspective. Meanwhile, red doesn't even see the problems. It just sees things that are being done. Oftentimes, you'll find that white will end up stowing red away, just getting red aside, out of the way in general, just because they keep making a mess of white's carefully tuned systems. Now, last but certainly not least, white's relationship with black. The first thing that comes to me when I think about white and black's differences are white's focus on solidarity, holding oneself together with a group, versus black's ideal of solitude, being on one's own and having strength in being alone. Now, the more common difference between white and black is going to be morality of white versus the amorality of black. Now, this can sometimes be a point of misconception when people view white and black. A lot of times people will see white as good and black as evil, just because black does have a tendency toward less than moral choices and actions. Black doesn't see itself as immoral, but white does. White sees black's amorality and judges that as evil. I'll get to that in a minute. Further defining that, white's morality is a belief in good and bad. Meanwhile, black's amorality doesn't believe that good and bad exists, it just believes in a system of gray. Another very relatable comparison is white's focus on duty versus black's utilization of convenience. White will hold itself to its promises and to its word. Meanwhile, black can often go back on its word on a dime if it thinks that it'll benefit from doing so. White would give anything for its own ideals. Meanwhile, black would sell its frickin' grandma just to get another rung up the ladder of success. That's an exaggeration. You know what I mean. And now we get to the things that white and black agree on. Generally, they both agree on personal sacrifice as a means to an end. Generally, that'll depend on the end. Black wants to profit from it, meanwhile, white wants everyone else to benefit from it. Mechanically, in Magic as a game, you'll find life is a resource as being a very white-black mechanic. Both colors believe in practicality. They like seeing results, and neither are very much strangers to using hands-on means. Black and white also both believe in the usefulness and success of religion and faith-based teachings, instruction, direction as means. And sometimes that can be means of inspiring hope or inspiring goodwill. Sometimes that can be means of manipulation and means of personal profit. Kind of can lean to either end, and sometimes they come together. That's white and black for you. Now, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but let's go into how white views black. So full stop, white sees black as a villain. White thinks that black's loose morals and ambition are a very deadly combination that leads to cruelty and malevolence. In white's eyes, there is good and there is bad. And because black believes the world isn't that simple, white sees them as bad. White thinks that with how capable and productive black is, the fact that the latter won't use its talents to benefit others without question is enough for white to judge them and deem them evil. Now, we've talked a lot about white in sort of larger, more general ideals and situations. We've talked about white and its relationships with other colors and its perspectives on the other colors. Now I'm going to try and boil white down to traits and aspects that are much more focused on an individual and judging of the individual. When you see white-aligned folks at their best, a lot of times that will exhibit itself in the person is able to keep things running. White-aligned folks at their best will be very motivated, and oftentimes that motivation will influence those following or just around them. White at its best will be keeping others safe and happy, safe and secure. When white is pure and well-guided, its rules and regulations will ensure the genuine security for others, both physically and emotionally, again, at its best. White at its best will be non-judgmental in its selflessness. When white is at its peak of commonly good morality, it will treat fairly even those it disagrees with, sort of like a defense attorney representing someone they know is guilty. They will still defend them to the full extent of the law because they believe in the fair trial. And in doing so, white will maintain its values of fairness and justice for all indiscriminately at its best. Meanwhile, white at its worst will often propagate a very us versus them ideal. One of the most toxic of white's traits is when it conflates good and bad with us and them, often resulting in the spreading of fear of those who are different or unfamiliar or who don't follow white's doctrines. Now, more on a personal level, white at its worst might be overcomplicated in its organization, which, while not necessarily toxic, another worst for white-aligned folks is when they might end up overanalyzing or oversaturating their organizational system, which inevitably results in gross inefficiency and eventually an abandonment of order. For example, when you're trying to organize files on a computer, you might have data within a file, within a file, within a file, within a system of files, and you have to go through 8 different things to try and get to it, to the point where it's just more efficient to have less organization. White can often overanalyze and overorganize. I'm saying that as a guilty party. And now white can also, at its worst, sometimes become so overzealous that it may forget others don't function as well under white's own systems and doctrines, and will try to fix them under the guise of just trying to help. This can also be a symptom of white's potential self-righteousness or need for control. Again, that's white at its worst, is when it's forcing its own methods onto others that are not necessarily white-aligned or as white-aligned as they are. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of being a white-aligned individual. A lot of times, white-aligned people will be very good at following instruction. They're going to be generally pretty good at either working with and or leading others, because in that sort of hierarchy, they sort of thrive being in that clear set of hierarchy and authority. White can often be good at solving material problems with objective solutions. They'll see that this is clearly how this is done, so let's just get it done. White can be very quick and confident with its decision making. Even if that decision might end up being incorrect, sometimes their pure confidence and faith in that decision might end up making it work. White is very good at logistics and efficiency in the process of getting something done and fine-tuning that to get a thing done as efficiently as possible. Often you'll find that white-aligned individuals have a near incorruptibility to them, and you can see that as like good stubbornness. And also generally, white-aligned folks are especially inclined to working for the needs of the many. Now, weaknesses that might attribute themselves to white-aligned folks are arrogance or inflexible morals, which you can consider to be bad stubbornness. Sometimes white-aligned folks are going to be considered stubborn as a mule. There you go. As I went into a little bit with white at its worst, sometimes white-aligned folks have a susceptibility to xenophobia and tribalism or othering. Sort of othering people that are different from them because they don't ascribe to white's own morals, beliefs, or just where they are. Sometimes white will have trouble thinking outside the box. They're so adept at working with what is known, with what is tangible, with what is fact, that when it comes to the more abstract, sometimes white falls short. To the point where sometimes their objectivity may get in the way of their compassion. They might start thinking of people as statistics and data and quotas instead of as actual individuals with feelings and emotions. To that end, white can sometimes have a tendency to act impersonally or stoically, and it often permits itself to suffer in order to support or fulfill a task or a role, often and especially in service to others, which is a great segue into the beginning of my examples of white-aligned characters in fiction. Keep that last point in mind, because the first character I'm bringing up is Luisa from Encanto. Now, Luisa from the film is someone who devotes herself to service to her community and is literally puts everyone else above herself, to the point where she is suffering from the weight of being in service to others. And so she's suffering from that exact point of sacrificing herself for the sake of keeping everyone at level. We don't necessarily see any points of her being especially organized or religious in any way necessarily, but when you look at this character, you judge them by their most defining trait, which is that exact insecurity, which is a very white-aligned way of thinking. Another example as more of a white-aligned villain is Alexander Pierce from Captain America: The Winter Soldier. He, being a very high-ranking official in the American government and also a member of Hydra, which is a tyrannical secret organization in the MCU, what he wants is to eliminate specific threats, specific people, before they become a problem. Because his faction of Hydra believes in absolute rule and control. A very antagonistic white tenet. And so he thinks once he gets rid of all the problem individuals, that people can be more easily kept in order. A lot of his white aspect to the extreme just involves the punishment before the crime, which is a line that Captain America in the film actually counters directly. Keeping in line with comic books, Superman is probably one of the most prolific white-aligned characters. I mean, in his own phrase is truth and justice. Superman is shown as the pillar of good. He uses his powers to serve others, and never for his own personal gain exclusively. He is so good that he generates villains purely off the fact that he is so good. I should also say that I don't know a ton about Superman as far as comics go, so I'm mostly just saying this based off my own secondhand perspective on the character. And the last character I'm going to bring up is Eddard Stark from Game of Thrones, from A Song of Ice and Fire. Throughout Season 1 of Game of Thrones, Eddard is so stubborn, obvious, and clear about his devotion to holding onto his personal code, holding on to his word. He is a man of his word, and he is notorious for being so. He's a man of honor, and that honor and justice eventually leads to his downfall in a city where he is surrounded by black-aligned folks in places of power that see him as a threat. And now, spoilers for Game of Thrones, for the few of you who haven't seen it and still want to, a lot of people will argue that Eddard keeping Jon's identity a secret might go against his white alignment, but I would counter with he's still holding on to his code because he promised his sister that he would keep John's identity a secret, and so by lying, he is then keeping to his personal code still. And now it doesn't matter if that's against somebody else's personal code because it holds to his own code, and that's what keeps him white aligned. So yeah, that's gonna wrap up my deep dive to white as a philosophy along the color pie, along the color wheel. Please, if you have more thoughts on things that either I haven't touched upon or things that you would like to add, note them in the comments. If you have more characters that you think are very mono white aligned, again, put them in the comments and I'll check those out. I read all of the comments. So yeah, please feel free to share your opinions on white, your perspective on white. Let me know things that you agreed with, things that you disagreed with. What are things that I missed that you would like for me to maybe apply in the future? And if you want more examinations of monocolors, I have that same article that I mentioned from the last video. I'll put that in the description as well. Next up, appropriately, next color I'm gonna do is blue, which that video should take a lot less time, hopefully, to get written because I already have the outline for my videos now for these colors, or for at least for the monocolors. I am realizing now that I don't think this will work for dual color combinations, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, next color is blue, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Please join me. That's all I've got to say, except for one last thing. So I'll catch you next time, and please be kind, be creative, and play games. Bye. Wow. I didn't think I could do that. You learn something new every day, huh?